Unlock your potential today at skillbakery.com.
Previous lecture, we covered component-based routing in SolidStart. Over here, you can see that for component-based routing, we had to make imports over here and consider a scenario where you have multiple components like this. So the import list will itself be quite lengthy. And then the next thing was that for every import that we had, we also have to provide the route specifically in our app.tsx file. Now, to overcome all these issues, what we will be doing is we will be implementing file-based routing. Now, file-based routing, as you can see, is pretty easy. The first thing that we need to do is create a directory called routes. Over here, you can see that routes directory. And then inside the routes directory, we will have to create a default route. Now, the default route starts with a file called index.tsx. So here we have our index.tsx. Now, the index.tsx in our case is the view users component that we created. So the view users is basically over here renamed as index.tsx, and this is what we have over here. We have two users and they are being listed over here, and you can see the output on the other side. So this is the default route. So when the application will launch, this is what the user will see. Now, once that's done, you will notice that we have moved the users directory from the src directory within the routes directory itself. And if I expand these two, you'll find that we have the create user renamed as create.tsx just to shorten the route, and the user details.tsx file has been renamed in a different way. So over here, if you see, the route that we had was user details then an ID. So this was the dynamic part of the route. What we have done is for user details, we have renamed this particular file as details directory, and within that we have the dynamic component like id.tsx. So the id.tsx is actually the user details.tsx file that we earlier had. And once user visits any of the IDs, the details will be shown over here accordingly. So this is all you need to do in order to have the file-based routing in SolidStart. So just to recap, we have to do these two imports, file routes, which comes from SolidJS start router, and then Suspense from SolidJS. And one thing to note over here is that you see we have some attributes provided to the route itself. And that is whatever we are passing, the routes that we are passing will be part of this particular thing, attribute. So we have root props defined, and then we have suspense props.children. The router, as we have seen in the previous lecture and on this one as well, is the component which is the top level routing component in SolidStart, and it wraps our entire application, providing routing utility like useParams or useNavigate and more to the child components. The key feature of router is that the root property specifies a custom wrapper component for all routes rendered inside the router. Now here, the custom wrapper is a suspense component that wraps the props.children. So the root property is a function that receives props. A props.children represents the child components rendered by the routes. By wrapping props.children in suspense, it ensures that lazy loaded components or components using asynchronous data handling work seamlessly. So what exactly is Suspense? It's a SolidJS component used to handle asynchronous loading, example fetching data or lazy loading component. While data is being fetched, it can display a fallback UI, example a spinner or a loading message, and this makes it ideal for wrapping dynamic or data fetching routes. Then finally, we have the file routes over here, and the file routes component automatically generates routes based on the file structure in the src routes directory, and we have just now explored, and it scans all files in the src routes folder that creates corresponding routes dynamically. So how all this works. First is the router initialization. The router initializes the routing system and applies the custom route wrapper, Suspense in this case, to all child routes. Then we get file routes, which scans the src routes directory and dynamically maps files to URLs. Then we have our Suspense integration, The root property wraps all routes in a suspense component, enabling the use of lazy loading components or asynchronous data fetching within any route. If a route uses asynchronous data, Suspense ensures the app doesn't crash and shows a loading fallback until the data is ready. So that was file-based routing in SolidStart. And here we can just see this in action now. If I click on details, you'll see that our user details are coming up. And if I go over here and change the route from user details to users create, you'll find the create new user coming up. And that's how easy it is. We have not changed anything as far as the code is concerned, but you see how easy it was to transform it from component-based routing to file-based routing. If you find the video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe.